Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 15th of May 2024. TLDR of today is big explosions in Crimea. Ukrainians have done, I think, a really good strike on Belbek airbase, but it's going south quite literally in Kharkiv Oblast for the Ukrainians, and that is a real challenge, and it looks like there's some cock-ups concerning the Ukrainian defense there. So we'll come to that. Right. Okay, Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video below. 1,510 personnel lost is a very high number, second highest number of the war. So this is a significant day of Russian losses. 14 tanks is significant. 48 armoured personnel vehicles is a very high number. 23 artillery systems is above average. So we can see some serious losses for the Russians there, and that's to be expected given the activity going on up and down the front line in the east, in the south, on Dnipro, but also up in Kharkiv. I think that a good deal of these losses aren't necessarily coming from Kharkiv. I don't know of how successful the Ukrainians have been in attriting the Russian forces up there in particular. I know there's quite a lot of footage coming out from random places, not random, but a number of places along the front line elsewhere. So Terny and Torska, a column of vehicles getting hit there. We have all the usual places on that eastern front being very attritional for the Russians. So yeah, 48 vehicles and fuel tanks is fairly high in that category, and 7 pieces of special equipment. So I think that's quite a challenging night, or challenging day, sorry, for the Russians yesterday. There's no Andrew Perpetua lost stats today, so I'm going to pop into some Oryx stats. But before we get there, Spartan News, who counts up the losses from the General Staff and puts that they have calculated, puts a dollar value to those losses. Russia's trending to lose 40,000 troops this month. Wrap your brain around 40,000 in 31 days. The US lost 51,000 in Vietnam in a decade, and that was a colossal failure. Russia be like, hold my vodka. Well, of course, we must remember that that is dead and wounded in terms of the top line personnel figure, but still, that is over and above the sustainable numbers of recruitment that Russia is able to get. So 30,000, they say they're recruiting a month. They lose 41,000, then that has a real net impact on the Russian forces there. But of course, take these figures with a pinch of salt, both in terms of the 30,000 recruitment figure and the 41,000 General Staff figure for Russian losses. I think, personally, when I look at this, it's not so much like I keep saying, about the 1,510 as a number, or indeed, I don't really ever concentrate on the total number. For me, it's like, okay, where does this sit in the range that we have seen? Where does it sit in terms of the last week or so? And then that tells me something. Right, impromptu visit from my parents there, and I've forgotten exactly where I was talking about. I think, personnel losses. So, just another anecdote. I don't know that there's too much that can be drawn from this. You're going to get this. Both sides will have arrangements like this. But packaging of dead Russians, they managed to evacuate from the front lines before returning to their families here. So this video shows significant coffin numbers there. For the Russian soldiers as they come back, but I imagine there will be similar scenarios for Ukrainian soldiers as well. There were talks earlier on in the war about mobile crematoria, about all sorts of ways of processing so many dead soldiers. But yeah, then we have the Oryx count for the losses in the absence of Andrew Perpetua's lost stats. So here we have the Russian stats. The in total there are 67. What can we see here? Number of tanks, T90M destroyed, the latest tank there. A whole host of BMPs and other infantry fighting vehicles, APCs as well. Yeah, pretty significant numbers thereof. We've got a multiple launch rocket system. We've got a TOS-1A thermobaric launcher. We've got a transporter erector launcher for a Buk M2. That's a surface-to-air missile system, and some trucks and whatnot. We have an armor recovery vehicle, another engineering vehicle, Don't know what an AMN 590951 is, but one of those is destroyed. So pretty heavy losses counted there by Oryx. So 67 as opposed to Ukraine's 21. So that's a 3-to-1 advantage of the Russians have lost 3 times more plus than the Ukrainians. I haven't looked at how many destroyed versus damage, but here for the Ukrainians, we've got an M1, we've got an Abrams damaged and then abandoned. We've got a Marder. Interestingly, some Marders on the way from Germany. What else is worth noting? Oh, a Saxon, a UK beta tracked vehicle there. We've got Humvee with multiple launch rocket system. That's one that I was on yesterday's list for Andrew. We've got Strela 10 air defense system and a launcher for an S-300 destroyed there. So that is a high value one. But I'm not quite sure about the timing for both of these lists, because it might be that he operates, Jakub Janowski for Oryx operates on a different kind of time scale to Andrew Perpetua, or there'll be a lot of overlap from previous lists and all sorts, but it just gives you some idea in the absence of Andrew's one. I prefer to use just one source because it gives you that consistency through time, but it just seemed to be missing Andrew's timing at the moment with when I get my videos out. I'll check. In fact, let's just make sure he hasn't just produced it. No, nothing out yet. So another bit of evidence to look at. We've done a lot of these recently. This is a small part of a howitzer storage that was not covered in previous footage that Jay. So there's a couple of people that do. There's HIMARS, John P and Jay, who do these counting up of, a bit like Covert Caval on YouTube, counting up of these storage areas. Now, this is only a relatively small storage area, as you can see, or is a small part of a larger storage area. And this is a time-lapse one. So Tochny, interestingly, this is November 2020, and it goes through time. So you can see it's fairly full there. Likewise in January 2022, then we get December 2022, so that is into the war, October 2022, and they have, I think, dipped into it not an awful lot actually in January, in October there, so not a great deal. Then we go on to the latest one, which is March 2024. So this is very recent, and there are absolutely none left. They're completely empty. Storage is empty, and that is of howitzers. So that tells you something, that they are using them up. That's one storage area completely cleared out. There's been lots of argument. Andrew Perpetua has really started this argument on Twitter about shoot and scoot. I know some of you have been arguing about it in the threads. Trent Telenko here says, hard truth is that field artillery is no longer survivable without organic anti-aircraft guns. So he is advocating for it, basically having something like a Skynex going out whenever you have an SPG, a self-propelled gun, to kind of protect it. Also, battery tactics are non-survivable as single roving guns, HIMARS launchers in the drone-filled sky. So even if you have a battery of artillery, that can get taken out with some HIMARS that are being spotted by drones. But he still advocates shoot and scoot. So here, Trent Telenko said, I see Andrew Perpetua is going out of his way to get blocked by the US Army Field Artillery Branch school system. Shoot and scoot tactics are the US Army Field Artillery Branch's secular religion. It's why the soon-to-be congressionally mandated US Army Drone Branch is going to absorb field artillery in exactly the same way the US Army Armor Branch absorbed the horse cavalry post-World War II. However, CJ, who is part of the Tochny team, says, and he's also a casualty fan. Is he an officer himself? He trains artillery officers, I believe. I've literally used Andrew Perpetua's video and geointelligence analysis to help illustrate what combined arms warfare looks like in Ukraine during multiple field artillery classes for other officers. Shoot and scoot is not a doctrinal term for US tube artillery and never has been. So here we've got someone from within. So Trent Telenko is a logistics person, right? And saying that, you know, Andrew Perpetua's claims will get him blocked by field artillery. And then you got a guy from field artillery saying, I'm using this at the moment to train other officers that basically shoot and scoot is compromised, and it never really was a doctrinal thing. Even though I think, as mentioned, it was used and it was useful, I think, prior to drones. This is why we have seen this move from towed to tracked to wheeled, actually, vehicles that can indeed get out of dodge as soon as they shoot some rounds, but it's now the moving that is so vulnerable. Okay. John Ridge here says, who is always good to dip into here, the Bryansk ambush was when those 5 to 6 airframes went down in Bryansk Oblast. So you've got Belgorod above Kharkiv, you've got Kursk above Sumy, pretty much, and then is it Bryansk above sort of Chernihiv area. In Bryansk area, there was in May 2023, I think it was, 5 or 6 airframes that were shot down right in next to each other, in time, within an hour. And there's so many people going, "Oh, who's done this? What's happened?" A lot of people saying it was Russian air defense going wrong, essentially. And then other people saying, "Well, no, it could have been S-200s, it could have been this, could have been that." Well, actually, it now appears to be accepted that it was a German-provided Patriot fire unit. It caused a serious diplomatic incident between the German and Ukrainian governments. Part of the reason why we know it's that Patriot system is because they've painted those losses on the side of the... I mean, this Patriot system has taken down 3 fixed-wing aircraft and 3 helicopters. So, it has done, and this picture was, quite old now. As Rob Lee says, I believe this ambush on 4 or 5 Russian aircraft in Bryansk Oblast last year or a year ago was done by Patriots, and it doesn't seem like the US has placed any restrictions on their use. Interesting there. Well, John Ridge says, actually, the Germans kicked off about them using it. German aid to Ukraine said, Rob is completely right with this assumption. Already in July 2023, as in it was a Patriot, we knew it was the first German-delivered Patriot battery who shot down 2 fighter jets and 3 helicopters inside Russia back in May 2023. This was first officially confirmed in an interview with Yuri Ihnat, the then spokesperson for the Ukrainian Armed Forces, which was published in November 2023. So there's the idea that or the kind of proof that it was the German Patriot system. But the fact is, the Germans didn't, apparently, it seems, they didn't like that being used inside Russian territories, and so that's probably why you haven't seen it being done again, which is a real shame. So then this gets us onto, I'm going to talk about that in a little while, about whether American munitions are going to be allowed to be used inside Russian territory, as it's kicked up again. So here's an example. I can't show you the video, but it will be linked below. Another example of an FPV with a strong warhead shown by the 47th Mechanized Brigade. A group of Russians tried to hide in the remains of a building. It got completely leveled. This is worth seeing again for just the destructive power of some of these drones. They're now going in, blowing up inside a building. You fly them into a window, fly them into a door. The people are there. And yep, this is going to be relevant for both sides. I haven't seen explosions this large, though, as I've shown you on consecutive days with the Russians on the Ukrainians, but I'm sure they'll have that capability. It's just that some of these explosions, some of these IEDs on the drones are really significant. They have quite an explosive capability, and that just reduces a building to rubble. Here we have, in the suburbs of Moscow, an electrical substation. The Progress factory, which manufactures military equipment, was set on fire. So probably a bit of partisan activity there. And then a much larger fire here. This is really serious in Cheboksarsk in Chuvashia region in Russia. A big fire broke out at the Khimprom plant. The chemical industry plant is among the biggest in Russia, producing over 200 products. And that is a big old fire. So I assume that is not, well, I make assumptions that these aren't just accidents, because you can't have that many accidents happening in a year or over 3 years. Just these are anomalous, statistically anomalous. And even as I've said before, there have been several analyses on this to show that they are indeed statistically anomalous. Rebar, the very pro-Russian source, did a whole analysis early in the war saying that I'm sure it's something like 7-1 of fires to what the previous fires were. I could be wrong there, but anyway, it showed that there were more fires, and the fires were different. They were either bigger, or they were at particular places that wouldn't previously have caught fire when you look at the data back in time. So it's not only the type of fire, the frequency, the type of fire, like the size of these fires, and also the places that they're taking place. So there is something dodgy going on with that, whether it's directly to do with the war, as in like sabotage or whatnot, or whether it's insurance job, which is indirectly linked to the war because of the current economic context. It's hard to say. Right. Okay, going on to distant strikes. So yes, so this is the latest. This is just out. Governor Vitaly Kim, in the Mykolaiv governor, Ukrainian governor there, is saying that a couple of missiles have just hit Mykolaiv. So that's not looking good. It could be in retaliation for some pretty successful strikes last night. There were, so Max 23 last night was saying Sevastopol, Saki, Simferopol, Balaklava, Novofedorivka, Yevpatoria, Bakhchisarai, and in Crimea, explosions there. So there could be widespread explosions in Crimea, but there certainly was an attack on Belbek Air Base in Crimea. Enemy air defense systems are operating in Sevastopol and Yevpatoria, says Flash News. So yeah, lots going on over Crimea. Tim White says Ukraine has hit another oil depot in Russia. At least 2 explosions were heard at a fuel base in Rostov. So Rostov is to the right of Crimea. You've got Crimea, Sea of Azov, sort of Black Sea, north to Sea of Azov, and then you've got Rostov. So over there, some few hundred kilometers, I think, to the east, there's an oil depot that was hit. On the night of the 15th of May, GUR drones attacked a fuel base in Rostov region. Fire at the facility continues, according to UP. I think that's Ukrainska Pravda, with reference to intelligence. That's illustrative, so that's not the actual photo of the base. So there's no details coming out about that. Russia's closed airspace and airports in Kazan and Nizhnekamsk. An air raid warning has been declared. And also so we'll come back to that. There has been a drone that's been shot down. Russia says it shot down an attack drone. This video over the village of Verkhny Uzlon in Tatarstan tends to support this statement. So I think that might have been claimed one of those aeroplane drones that was supposedly shot down. We know that they've gone that far. This is fairly decent range to get there. I have no more details on that one. So the Ukrainians were fairly active last night, but here's the most successful, it appears. I'm fairly confident that some useful things have blown up because there were some pretty serious fires going on. So Tim White says, maybe Russia is short of air defense in occupied Crimea. It was very loud there in the early hours of the morning. Invaders say they shot down 10 ATACMS. So the Russians claim 10 ATACMS were shot down, but these are ballistic missiles, essentially, that are very difficult to shoot down. Many fires lit up around the Belbek airfield, and firm's data confirms that. So this is a NASA wildfires. Satellite imagery that was used traditionally to detect wildfires is being used to work out what's been hit and is on fire across Ukraine. And we can see, and indeed in Russia, when oil refineries have been hit, we can see there's some significant fires going on here. And where is here? Well, actually, those are the, what do they call it? They're called aprons, where these areas where the planes are kept and whatnot. Well, Ukrainian battle map says Ukrainian forces attacked Belbek Air Base in Crimea with 300-kilometer ATACMS missiles overnight. The attack took place 225 kilometers from the front line. So these much longer range. So you have the 84-kilometer missiles sent from HIMARS or GIMLRS, guided multiple launch rocket systems. Then you got the 150-kilometer ones with the cluster munitions, and now they have access to 300-kilometer ones. Again, I think with cluster munitions as well, because I think there's some imagery of clusters around here that have come out already. But this is results of the strikes are being clarified, but this is potentially really significant. So, based on firms data, Ukraine had a successful ATACMS strike on Belbek Air Base. Multiple passes show a massive fire encompassing the southern flight line, likely fed by burning fuel or munitions. And so now this will be an older satellite image, so that's not to say that all these planes would be there. Not at all, especially with the vulnerability of these places to ATACMS strike. So you'd assume the Russians would be fairly sensible about this. But this seems to be where the fires were coming from, as according to the firm's data. I'm not 100% sure what is going on there, whether that's the air traffic control or whether this is what these buildings are and whether they contain ammunition, but there were some serious fires. One would hope airframes went up in that, and you can see evidence of these fires, images from Belbek Air Base on fire after it was hit by 300-kilometer ATACMS, and some serious explosions taking place there. And then there is a cluster munition, submunition photo, and from another video in the distance, some really significant explosions there. So we don't know what has been destroyed, but I think that would be a very successful strike on Belbek Air Base. So moving on from that, in Kharkiv yesterday, 17 were wounded as a result of a hit on a 12-story building and the area nearby. The head of the regional military administration said one man is hospitalized in serious condition, one woman in a state of average severity. I'm sure that's an oxymoron. Children hospitalized and injured and whatnot. Horrible stuff. So this is a residential building that was just slammed by a munition. You can see there, it's pretty horrible stuff. That was in Kharkiv yesterday. Now Russia, this is okay. I think this should obviously have been sorted out ages ago. And I can't believe that the Ukrainians are not allowed to use certain weapons inside Russia, whether it be from US, German, or whoever. The UK has said they can. Finland has said they can. But anyway, Dave Brown here reports that Ukraine is making a new push. Well, this is a Politico article. Ukraine is making a new push to get Biden to lift his ban on using US-made weapons to strike inside Russia, saying the policy kept them from attacking Russian positions as Moscow prepared for its major march toward Kharkiv. So apparently there are lawmakers, I think Ukrainian lawmakers in US at the moment trying to sort this out. Ukrainian officials watched for weeks as the Russians massed near the Ukrainian border, unable to use US supplied weapons to conduct a preemptive strike due to Washington's policy. Quote, "We keep coming back to the same problem, that it's Russia telling us what we should be doing," a Ukrainian lawmaker said. "You're giving us a stick, but you will not let us use it." And I'm totally with them on this. It's really, really depressing and infuriating, actually. So, War Translated says Russia sees no issue launching North Korean missiles and Iranian drones in Ukraine from Russia. Ukraine is forbidden from striking invader targets using American weapons. It makes zero sense, really. It's silly. Absolutely. You can't say this is a red line. You cannot say this is escalatory if Russia is already freaking doing it. Russia is doing that with North Korean and Iranian munitions. Let's take back the narrative in this war and let's stop allowing Russia to dictate what Ukraine does and what the West does. Gee whiz. Really infuriating. Just got myself even angrier. Colby Badwar rightfully says Ukraine could have disrupted Russia's Kharkiv offensive before it was launched, but the Biden administration wouldn't let them. How many Ukrainians are dying because of this insanity? Ukrainian officials watched for weeks as the Russians massed near the Ukrainian border, unable to use US-supplied weapons to conduct a preemptive strike due to Washington's policy. Biden administration, as a condition of sending long-range weapons to Ukraine, said they could not be used to strike inside Russian territory. Quote, "The main problem right now is a White House policy to limit our capability to strike military targets inside Russia," David Arkamia, chair of the ruling Servant of the People Party in the Ukrainian parliament, said during a visit to Washington on Tuesday. So hopefully, I mean, fingers crossed this will get changed, but so often we see requests for tourists, requests for this, requests for that, and there's this intransigence not to change tack because one presumes of the fear of Russia. But Russia are frickin' doing it themselves. It's not escalatory, it's parity. Rob Lee says, Russia's offensive operations have almost exclusively been conducted from occupied Ukrainian territory since 2022, which Ukraine could strike with US provided weapons. So this cross-border offensive is a change. I think it would be prudent for the US to reconsider this policy in this case. I would say not just in this case, just full stop. And part of the reason, I don't know, to be honest, I don't know if this is Kharkiv, but here we've got an example. So, quote, this is how Russians hit our positions with cards. So, guided glide bombs, exactly 4 in a row. There are 2 volleys at once, 8 carbs for landing for trench lines. So, in other words, where the Ukrainians are defending trenches or for landing positions, I guess either way, whether that's Ukrainians going on some kind of mini counter or Russians, they hit with these huge bombs that have such a devastating effect. And these in the Kharkiv region are being released from inside Russia. So it gets back to using the US or any other country's weaponry inside Russian territory, such as those Patriots. Gets back to those that why should Germany get upset with the Patriots being used to devastating effect in Bryansk? Nothing happened about that. There was no escalation. Well, let it bloody continue. Because I'm getting frustrated because things are not going very well for the Ukrainians in the Kharkiv region, partly due to their own poor organisation in sorting out fortifications up there. That we are now coming on to see that going on to other bits and pieces, but this segues on perfectly. There is now imagery coming out of Dragon's Teeth just being piled up on the side of the road, ready to be laid, but not being laid. I mean, look at these. These are hundreds and hundreds of Dragon's Teeth doing absolutely nothing. So Deep State shows photos of concrete pyramid blocks that were set to be part of a new Ukrainian defensive positions just lying on the side of the road near the settlement of Lipsky in the Kharkiv Oblast. You know, one of the places is being attacked or is now under control of the Russians, where the Russians are currently advancing. Deep State, citing Ukrainian soldiers, say that these blocks have been lying there since the summer of 2023. Quote, let's not draw conclusions. Let them be made by the commission that will consider the good faith of the contractors who built the defense structures and the responsible persons who were supposed to exercise control. So there's a lot of grumbling going on about, you know, why were there no... So I understand why the fortifications weren't built next to the border. I get that, and I've made that case. And I've been to near the border area in Sumy, and you wouldn't build fortifications there because we were afraid of getting hit by drones, right? So you wouldn't sit there and spend weeks and weeks building big trench lines with excavators. You would just get hammered, right? But you can lay mines. You can send sapper teams out to lay mines. It would still be dangerous, or you could rely on maybe some well-placed ram munitions that release them in the air, sending by artillery, as long as you don't put it on near your own forces, because you're still operating near the border. So it is slightly risky, but there have been these claims that the minefields just haven't been there. And now there is the idea that the Ukrainians are retreating from parts of northern Kharkiv. General Staff saying in the Lukyantsy and Vovchansk areas, due to the impact of enemy fire and assault, and to save the lives of the servicemen and avoid casualties, units carried out a maneuver to more advantageous positions. So the old classic moving to more advantageous positions is French for retreating. In some areas near Lukyansky, the fighting continues. That's the General Staff. So that's the actual statement from them. But yeah, it's not looking good for them up in Kharkiv. I don't think the Russians are going to get anywhere particular. But I've had a bit of think about this, because I said, and I've said for the last week, that I'm a little bit unsure about the Russians' rationale for attacking here. And I'm not sure whether it wouldn't have been better for the Russians to have committed those troops just to the eastern front line to make much more significant gains. But here is something I was thinking about last night that makes sense, actually, to me. But I've not heard anyone else say this. But actually, I think I've got a source that might confirm something along this line. If the Russians can take parts of land in, say, the Sumy Oblast and Kharkiv Oblast, and it doesn't have to be particularly strategic, or no, it doesn't have to be operationally important. It doesn't have to achieve X and Y, although it's nice if it does. But if they just take a whole bunch of land And then there are negotiations that take place. If all that land was just in one area, like you've got this contiguous land running down from Kharkiv, Kupiansk area, down that northeastern front line, down the east and across the south into the Dnipro. If you take another chunk of that and maybe another chunk of that with those 50,000 people, then that all becomes part of the same negotiating, token or whatever. But if you have land up there, land there, land there, and land there, maybe 4 little areas up on the northern border, then when you are forced to a negotiating table, that becomes a separate negotiating token. And so you can say, right, okay, well, we'll move out of those lands, but we're not going to move out of Luhansk and Donetsk or something like that. It becomes just almost psychologically over and above these areas of land here. So if the Russians had used those 50,000 troops to get more land around Avdiivka and move on to Pokrovsk, that would still all be part of this one negotiating token, if you like. Whereas these other areas just give the Russians more currency. And I'm wondering whether actually that's quite sensible. So although I've said it was done for the Russians to do this, I was thinking in terms of attrition, but of course I don't really care about that. I was thinking in terms of the best use of those soldiers for getting the most amount of land. But actually, the whole negotiating thing, and it may be like 2 years away still, but if they can keep a foothold in there, then that gives the Russians, I think, much more leverage in negotiations, and I think therefore that might be quite sensible. And then we have Russia coming out with a report, so Royal United Services Institute. The report is titled, "In Ukraine, Russia is beginning to compound advantages." We'll just read the beginning of this. So Russia's now started the early phases of the anticipated summer offensive. Over the past few days, Russian troops across the border in the north, occupying a number of villages. Ukraine has spent several months fortifying Kharkiv, but storming the city is not how Russia intends to fight. The Russian target this summer is the Ukrainian army, and against this target it has started to compound its advantage. The long front. So the Russian forces attacking Ukraine have now expanded to 510,000 troops. This means that Russia has established significant numerical superiority over the armed forces of Ukraine. Heavy losses among Russia's officer corps and more capable units earlier in the war have reduced its capacity to conduct large-scale offensive ground maneuver. The Russians have been limited to conducting platoon and company attacks rather than brigade or divisional operations, meaning that they rarely decisively overmatch Ukrainian defenders at any one location. With such overall numerical superiority, however, Russia has begun to turn this limitation to its advantage. The front in Ukraine spans almost 1,200 kilometers. Along Ukraine's northern border near Chernihiv, Russian sabotage groups continue to probe Ukrainian positions. A large group of forces near Belgorod, meanwhile, has long threatened to push towards Sumy or Kharkiv and has made its presence felt with fire. The main focus of Russian efforts has been in Donbass, but in the south, Russian troops have also been skirmishing along the Zaporizhia front and have been conducting amphibious raids across the Dnipro. They're met with little success, but the breadth of their attacks has fixed Ukrainian troops in the line of contact and forced the AFU to spread out its artillery, expending munitions to break up successive Russian attacks. This dynamic has prevailed for the last 4 months. Having stretched the Ukrainians out, the contours of the Russian summer offensive are easy to discern. First, there will be a push against Kharkiv. Ukraine must commit troops to defend its second largest city, and given the size of the Russian group of forces in this area, this will draw in reserves of critical materiel from air defences to artillery. Second, Russia will apply pressure on the other end of the line, initially threatening to reverse Ukraine's gains from its 2023 offensive, and secondly, putting at risk the city of Zaporizhia. Ukraine should be able to blunt this attack, but this will require the commitment of reserve units. Once Ukraine commits its reserves to these directions, the main effort will see the expansion of the Russian push in Donbass. So, push from the north, push from the south. Ukraine panics, moves reserves to those places, and then where it's already really thin and where the Russians have been making gains previously, then they reconcentrate there. The Axis is already making slow but steady progress. The objective is clear: to cut Ukrainian supply lines connecting Konstantinivka and Kramatorsk. The Russians hope that once Ukraine loses these roads and give the Ukraine's localized interior lines, they will be able to push north and south, stranding Ukrainian artillery on one axis or the other. Russia's aim is not to achieve a grand breakthrough, but rather to convince Ukraine that it can keep up an inexorable advance kilometre by kilometre along the front. And it talks about, advantage in the air, how to stabilize the front, so on and so forth. And of course, it depends on how much equipment the West get Ukraine, but also on mobilization. So all the same issues, but there you do get a sense that a Russian, it just depends on how much they've got in a tank. I've been saying for a long time, I don't think they've got all that much in a tank along the eastern front, especially as their reserves have been pushed to the north. And that's my whole point about why are you doing that when you are stretched somewhat here. You are making gains along the east, but it's costing you dearly. That would be a good place to put those 50,000. But actually, if they can make gains in the north, the claim is try and make gains in the south. I'm not sure how easy that's going to be, at least, to the extent that they are doing in the north. Then the east could become easier as the front line is just too long for the Ukrainians with their meager reserves. It's just too long for the Ukrainians to so well defend. We shall see. It just depends an awful lot on how much the Russians have got to throw at the problem and how much help they're getting from Iran, North Korea and China. Right. Jay in Kyiv says that, and I don't know the source of this Putin quote, Putin now wants to legalize what he's managed to occupy in Ukraine, pause fighting so he can rebuild his military. The start of negotiations with Ukraine can be along the current front line without the withdrawal of Russian troops, according to Putin. So that's the idea that all of the land they've taken, we'll take that. Thank you very much. So we can start negotiations, but we will have all of that land. So this is all about, if you are going to go into negotiations, who has a momentum, who has a leverage. And at the moment, the Ukrainians are really struggling. 7 months of having no ammunition and even longer of having not enough mobilization is really going to hurt their ability to negotiate. Is hurting where they are at the moment. Now, in terms of what's going on with this reshuffle in the Russian military hierarchy, Osechkin's sources report that Salikov and Krivoruchko have submitted their resignations. They were both deputy defense ministers under Shoigu. So you had certain deputies under Shoigu. You had Timur Ivanov, who is been arrested. You've got a third in charge has been investigated. Now you've got two others who have resigned. And you've got Mr. Clown Man, the guy that's so often in memes with a clown wig and a clown nose and whatnot. Igor Konoschenkov, the guy who has, throughout the war, I haven't seen him make many claims recently, but he's one that says, the Ukrainians have lost like 10 million people today and 37,000 airframes. And you're going, really? Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but that's what he does, exaggerates. The Russian Ministry of Defense spokesperson has reportedly resigned. No more F-16s, Space Stars, Starship Enterprise, 250,018 biomosquitoes, 148,827 HIMARS and 250,000 NATO troops reportedly destroyed and killed. So he's claimed not all of those things. He's claimed NATO troops have been killed, F-16s. He claimed that Bradleys were blown up before Bradleys were even in Ukraine, etc., etc., etc. So anyway, he seems to have resigned. And again, what do all these movements mean? But I have argued that the movement of the defense minister who's from the economy, Belousov, is a pretty, I think, good appointment. And I do believe the Russians will be in a better place having him in charge of the military as an economist, effectively, because he's not going to be having anything to do with the prosecution of the war. He'll have everything to do with the Russian MOD getting hold of what they need to get hold of in terms of manufacturing and procuring military equipment. Integrating the military with Russia's economy, says Kyiv Independent, is a key task for its defense minister, soon to be appointed Russian defense minister. Andrei Belousov told the Federation Council, Russia's upper house of parliament. Moving on, Surovikin, who I've said I think Gerasimov will not last 2 or 3 weeks. I don't even think he's all there. I think he's still not very well, injured, whatever it is, from that strike on Crimea that was reported to have killed him. And then he turned up months and months later. but he doesn't look all there. So I think the best explanation is he was probably injured in that. And we haven't seen him. We've not seen him do anything other than pin some medals and go to the voting booth for the presidential elections. That's all we've really seen him do. Oh, he went around a factory with Shoigu, but Shoigu was the one leading everything. Gerasimov just hasn't been. We haven't seen him speak really, other than mumble some things that weren't picked up on camera to the soldiers as he's giving medals out. But anyway, and there were claims that might. Could that have been anachronistic? I'm not sure. Anyway, Russian Army General Sergei Surovikin visited the Kremlin today, according to multiple Russian channels. That's yesterday. Surovikin was detained by Russian authorities for his role in Wagner's mutiny almost a year ago. In September 2023, he was appointed to head of CIS, Coordinated Committee for Air Defense, and since then was seen mostly in Africa. So he's basically been exiled to Algeria and Africa, where Russia are, they're active all over Africa. That's what he's been doing, which is keep you at arm's length. We don't want you involved in any more mutinies or coups. So it would be a risk to have him in charge of as CIC Commander-in-Chief of the war effort because of his proximity to Prigozhin previously. But as far as Ukraine are concerned, they would not want Surovikin to be in charge because he would likely be far more effective than Gerasimov. So Ukraine has lost 8 gigawatts of capacity, that's energy, and is forced to cover the deficit with imports from Western partners, as according to Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. Given the situation, the government has adopted a resolution that amplifies the placement of gas pistons and gas turbine plants. According to Shmyhal, the decree will remove a number of bureaucratic procedures to make the recovery progress move faster. On top of that, Ukraine, says the Kyiv Independent, introduces emergency power cuts throughout the country amid significant shortage. Ukrenergo has said it is going to introduce restrictions due to the damage from the recent Russian strikes and the increase in energy construction after the temperature drop. So that's going to be a challenge for the Ukrainians. And just finally, just a random bit here, the 3rd Assault Brigade reports that captured Moscow boys, captured Russian soldiers, are given pills before going on an assault. The pills inhibit any sense of danger and risk. What is it? Why don't the media report about it? This has long been said throughout the war. This is not unusual for war. We've seen it in previous wars. We've seen it going all the way back to Vikings and Berserkers. But there have been these various claims. Sometimes people have poured scorn on these claims, but it wouldn't surprise me at all, especially if you're sending convicts into effectively almost certain death or similar. So what's similar to death? I guess getting maimed and whatnot. So it doesn't surprise me. I would think it likely is true, but it could also be psyops or whatever. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. Take care and I'll speak to you soon.